Eldest of the 7 fathers of the dwarves, he is not only the ancestor of the kings of the Longbeards, or Durin's folk, but the prime ancestor of their entire race. Known as Durin the Deathless, he was made by the Vala Aule and given independent life by Eru himself. This figure, the most renowned in the entire history of the dwarves, the most secretive of all races in Arda, is shrouded in mysterious beliefs and traditions, with even Tolkien himself never giving us definitive answers to just what is true over what the dwarves believe. Hello everyone, in this video I will be looking at Durin and the dwarves. I will give a bit of history of Durin, his importance to the dwarves, sharing Tolkien's thoughts on their beliefs in relation to Durin's return through reincarnation or re-embodiment, and will hopefully once again demonstrate that what is apparently true in the Legendarium, or what is part of the canon for those who care and obsess about that, is far less interesting than sharing what the figures within Tolkien's world possibly believe, sharing the mythology, and that there can be no right answer here when it comes to the secretive, deeply held traditions of the dwarves. While this isn't a history of Durin video, I'm sure there's plenty of them that can be found, I think it's important to understand at least a bit of his history to highlight his importance. Before even the elves had awoken, long before there was even a sun or moon, the Vala Aule, the craftsmen of the Valar, desired the arrival of the children of Iluvatar, having only witnessed them in a vision put forth by Eru to the Ainur. As it says in the Silmarillion, it is told that in their beginning the dwarves were made by Aule in the darkness of Middle-earth. For so greatly did Aule desire the coming of the children, to have learners to whom he could teach his lore and his crafts, that he was unwilling to await the fulfillment of the designs of Iluvatar. And Aule made the dwarves even as they still are, because the forms of the children who were to come were unclear to his mind, and because the power of Melkor was yet over the earth. And he wished therefore that they should be strong and unyielding. But fearing that the other Valar might blame his work, he wrought in secret, and he made first the 7 fathers of the dwarves in a hall under the mountains in Middle-earth. When Eru challenged Aule on why he had attempted to create beyond his authority and power, the will of Aule was known. His humility and pure motives, despite his impatience, were rewarded with his dwarves becoming more than puppets controlled by his will, to fully independent beings, adopted children of Eru with the spark of life within them, independence. Yet they were not allowed to exist before the first children, elves. This is when we learn of the earliest traditions related to the dwarves. It is said that the dwarves were to sleep in darkness under stone, to awaken after the elves. When the time comes, Eru would awaken them, and often strife shall arise between the children of Eru's choice and his adopted children. The 7 fathers of the dwarves, Durin being the first, were laid to rest at different locations in Middle-earth, and as Tolkien tells us in letters, each of the fathers would be laid to rest with a mate, save Durin the eldest, who had none. When Durin finally awoke, he was alone, until in the deeps of time and the awakening of that people, he came to Azanul Bizar, and in the caves above Keled Zarim in the east of the Misty Mountains, he made his dwelling, where afterwards were the mines of Moria, renowned in song. He became known as the Deathless due to his longevity at this time, yet he was still mortal, and died before the Elder Days had passed, meaning he must have died before the end of the First Age. People attempt to calculate his age based on this, but that's not important here. He is just notable for living longer than any other dwarf. And this title of Deathless would later not only refer to what must have been an ancient age, but his apparent presence in Middle-earth at various times beyond his death in the First Age. As Tolkien says in Durin's Folk, the dwarves have strange tales concerning themselves and their fate in the world. With the tomb of Durin within Khazad Dûm, the great mansion of the dwarves under the Misty Mountains, his line never failed. It is within this section of the appendices where we are told that 5 times an heir was born in his house, so like to his forefather that he received the name of Durin. He was indeed held by the dwarves to be the Deathless that returned. Notable kings named Durin would be Durin III, who ruled Khazad-dûm during their great friendship with the elves of Eregion in the Second Age, while there is a tradition stating that the Dark Lord Sauron tortured and killed Celebrimbor while obtaining the Rings of Power that would later be given to the Dwarf Lords. It is also a tradition of the dwarves that Celebrimbor gifted the first of these 7 rings to Durin III himself. Another notable Durin would be Durin VI, who also ruled from Khazad-dûm, but in the Third Age of Middle-earth. He was the king slain by Durin's Bane, the Balrog that hid beneath the city and was awoken by the dwarves, causing Moria to be abandoned and feared. What about Durin the Last, Durin VII, a king who would return in the Fourth Age? We have mention of him in the Peoples of Middle-earth, where it is said that the line of Dain prospered, and the wealth and renown of the kingship was renewed, until there arose again for the last time an heir of that house that bore the name of Durin, and he returned to Moria, and there was light again in deep places, and the ringing of hammers and the harping of harps, until the world grew old and the dwarves failed, and the days of Durin's race were ended. As this is the only place this is mentioned, it is possible Tolkien had abandoned the idea, as it never made its way into the appendix proper. Christopher Tolkien suggests that the hasty preparation of the appendices for publication may have led to its omission, as Durin VII or Durin the Last does still appear in the genealogy of Appendix A. I'll leave this up to you to decide if the Fourth Age saw Durin's final return. Before offering different versions of the almost religious reverence given to Durin and his many appearances throughout the history of the dwarves, there is one event that clearly highlights the honoured position he holds, in not only his own house, but among all houses of the dwarves, across an entire race of people. Following Erebor's takeover by the dragon Smaug in the year 2770 of the Third Age, Durin's folk became wanderers and nomads. Thror, who many will know as the father of Thrain II, whom Gandalf encounters in Dol Guldur during the events of The Hobbit, and grandfather of Thorin II, commonly known as Thorin Oakenshield, had become poor and desperate. Thror willingly gave his son the ring of power he possessed that had been passed down through the years, and possibly crazed with age and misfortune, he was driven to folly and destruction. He made his way to his folks' ancient home of Moria with his companion Nar, who begged him not to enter. Thror could not be stopped, and proudly walked in as an heir of Durin that returns to his true home. Days later, Nar witnessed the desecration of Thror at the hands of orcs. Thror was beheaded, and the name Azog was written in dwarf runes on his face. The orc threw a purse of coins at Nar, telling him to leave the head and tell his people that Azog was the master of this place. As Nar fled in tears, he witnessed the body of Thror being hacked to pieces and cast to the crows.
Such was the tale that Nar brought back to Thrain, and when he had wept and torn his beard, he fell silent. 7 days he sat and said no word. Then he stood up and said,
"This cannot be borne!"
That was the beginning of the war of the dwarves and the orcs, which was long and deadly, and fought for the most part in deep places beneath the earth.
Bear in mind, Thror was not one of these figures said to be the return of Durin himself, but he was an heir of Durin. I can't imagine the reaction of the dwarves if a king named Durin had been treated this way. This act towards one who was heir to the eldest of their race managed to unite all the houses of the dwarves. Messengers told the tale in the north, east and west. Great forces were sent from the houses of the other fathers, and they were filled with wrath. They marched, assailed, and sacked every stronghold of the orcs from Gundabad, the place where Durin the Deathless himself apparently had awoken, all the way to the Gladden. A long and brutal war was fought before Azog was finally beheaded and the purse he had thrown to Nar was forced into his own mouth, his head set on a stake. So merciless was the fighting in this war that both the orcs and the dwarves were said to be greatly diminished in numbers. The dwarves risked everything to bring vengeance upon the orcs who had brought dishonour to an heir of Durin, and both the orcs and dwarves would never forget it. Let's get into this belief related to the return of Durin. We are told in the Peoples of Middle-earth that the strange ideas elves and men had about dwarves were largely derived by them from the dwarves themselves. This tradition says that it is not just Durin himself who returns, but the spirits of the original 7 fathers of the race. Durin is just the most renowned as the eldest, the ultimate forefather. The name Durin only being used by one of his true descendants, a name never used by any dwarf of any other house. Reverence and respect. In the Second Age, others named Durin had appeared as kings of the Longbeards, and following the death of Durin VI in the Third Age and the reign of Dain Ironfoot, it was prophesied by the dwarves themselves that Durin the Last, the 6th return of Durin the Deathless, would occur. The dwarves, believing that each of these kings named Durin not only resembled the eldest, but they retained the memory of their former lives as kings, as real and yet naturally incomplete, as if they had been consecutive years of life in one person. Dwarves did not share how this was possible, if they even knew, but the elves of Valinor had spoken with Aule himself, known as Mahal to the dwarves, about the nature of the dwarves' creation, and some of those elves, the Noldor, brought those stories to Middle-earth. Could Aule have been repeating what the dwarves knew, or could his words to the Noldor have influenced the belief system of the dwarves once they were told the words of their maker? I find this intriguing, as this belief or tradition almost links the 3 kindreds of elves, men and dwarves when it comes to their existence within Arda, their relationship with death. We know that elves are immortal, or at least have serial longevity, existing as long as Arda itself exists, being summoned to the halls of Mandos upon death, which they can reject, and possibly being re-embodied, walking among the living again in the Blessed Realm, and in very exceptional cases being re-embodied and walking among the living in Middle-earth, as we see with Glorfindel. Men are mortal. Their lives are short and they will die. It is believed that their death has them also summoned to Mandos, a summons they can't refuse, and after a brief time there, they will be surrendered to Eru himself, possibly leaving the circles of the world. Of course, as always, there are exceptional cases, such as Beren, who returned to life to be with his love Luthien before dying a second death with her. Or someone like Elros, the first king of Numenor, who accepted the gift of men as one of the half-elven, living to be 500 years old, the eldest of his race, at least eldest through a natural lifespan. If this tradition of the dwarves is to be believed, it's almost like the dwarves Aule fashioned himself shared in the gifts of both kindreds, as if what Aule imagined the children of Eru to be was put into his creations through his desire and will. Dwarves are a mortal race, but these eldest will endure. They will pass, but after a time they will return to the world and walk among their people. Dwarves never going too long without those who were first, guiding them and leading them as their kings. But I did say there were other traditions, other versions. Peoples of Middle-earth tells us that the dwarves believe Aule gained them a special privilege that distinguished them from elves and men. When Durin or any of the fathers of the dwarves died, their spirit sleeps following a long lifespan allotted to dwarves. The body of the dwarf would lie in a tomb at rest, harkening back to when the fathers themselves slept beneath the earth. Weariness and any hurts that had befallen him would be amended. After many long years he would arise and become king again. This is very different from someone resembling Durin or any of the other fathers. It would be the literal return of that figure, in body and spirit. The nature of Middle-earth also discusses this belief. Here it may be said, however, that the reappearance at long intervals of the person of one of the dwarf fathers in the lines of their kings, e.g. especially Durin, is not, when examined, probably one of rebirth, but of the preservation of the body of a former king, Durin say, to which at intervals his spirit would return. But the relations of the dwarves to the Valar, and especially to the Vala Aule, are, as it seems, quite different from those of elves and men. What's interesting about this is that it makes the poem sung by Gimli within Moria during The Lord of the Rings quite literal. There lies his crown in water deep, till Durin wakes again from sleep. What do we make of these traditions and beliefs? Can they work together? Are they merely different stages of Tolkien's writings? Perhaps some dwarves believe one tradition and some the other. I don't really think it matters. Isn't it in the nature of dwarves to be secretive? We can't know everything about them, and Tolkien writes his text as if he didn't even have all the answers. Perhaps the dwarves didn't even know for sure. If Tolkien answered all these questions for us, then this apparent secretive and private race wouldn't be. We are in the same position as elves and men, hearing tales of the dwarves, reading what they believe happens when the greatest among them dies. Their hope and belief that Durin and the other fathers walk among them, revered figures fashioned by the hand of their maker in the deeps of time. This is just a glimpse into the nature of dwarves and their beliefs. I have provided those traditions, but haven't settled on what is true and what isn't. As I've said, I don't think it's important to know that. Perhaps it is up to you how you view Durin the Deathless and the dwarves. We will never have a definitive answer, but sometimes mythology and legend offer something more than statements of fact, and that's how I personally approach the Legendarium. Just like with secret names, mysteries surrounding where they go when they die, and curiosity surrounding dwarf women, we are outsiders and aren't meant to know everything. All we know is that Durin the Deathless and the fathers of the dwarves are renowned, revered, and that even the dwarves may not know all the secrets and mysteries surrounding their race. Thanks for watching. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about Durin and the dwarves. Please leave your thoughts on what you think about anything I've covered here, and if you have any further questions that I can answer in my next Appendices video. If you enjoyed this content and haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider it, and maybe check out my Patreon page. As always, I hope to see you on the next chapter of The Red Book.